Okay, so we're looking at techniques for short answers. So short answers, different to an extended response, require us to succeed in smaller chunks, and therefore we have to make quick decisions about which ones do we attack and spend more time on, which ones do we hold back from. We also have to have a body of knowledge that we can draw upon. We can't just assume that we'll get this question right. If it's worth 2 marks, it wants something substantially more than a 1 mark type question. And it might require some evidence. So let's look at some techniques for short answers. The first thing is everyone in this examination has 10 minutes of reading time. So it's very important that you use that time wisely. Now, 10 minutes is given because there's a lot of reading to get done. Now, we can read something fairly quickly, but we need to read it so that we get an understanding of what's going on. I always say when you read something, always do a quick scan and say, okay, what text type is it? Let's look at the heading. Let's get a feel for what it's about. Then we do a closer reading. So a quick read just to get our finger on the pulse. The second read is to actually read with a more critical lens as we go over the text in view of the questions that we have to answer. So we need to focus firstly, and sometimes I might have a fingernail and I use it to mark the paper if there's something that catches my eye, but I'm not allowed to use a pen. So we open the reading book next to the questions, we have a look at it, and we take our time. We read the questions as well. So when we go over the close reading, we know what we are actually looking for. We look at the marks allocated for each question and organise the time proportionately. Obviously, if we have a question worth 1 mark, we spend less time on it. If a question's worth 5 or 6 marks, we spend more time on that question. I call those questions the discriminator questions. They're there deliberately to make sure that the top students get the most marks, the average students get a middle of the range mark, and the weaker students get a lower mark. So be aware of that. They've deliberately made those questions to target certain students and to make the exam fair, because some students need the opportunity to stretch out and show how good they are. But I always give it as a challenge to the weaker students. Be aware of that and try to push yourself to go to the next level. Read the unseen text for section 1, being conscious of the questions. So you know the questions, and we said you go back to that question and see what's there. Think about how the texts answer the questions for this section. Think about what each text says about human experiences and how it uses language and structure to make its point. You will need to be able to make a statement on human experiences, responding to the question and examples. You might name the language device, but it's more important to explain how the example develops the idea of human experience that you have stated. So if I say, well, they use a metaphor here, they use a personification. Well, so what? The identification is a lower order question, but the analysis of that identification is a higher order. So try to push yourself and always ask yourself, so what? Let me go a little bit further. And of course, try to use a black pen. There's a reason they ask for a black pen. It's easier to read, unless you've got special provisions. And it's like an instruction before you go into the exam. So it's like a small test of how committed you are to this particular task. Now, there's a way of tackling the short answer questions. Let's look at that and let's develop this technique. It uses the mnemonic CTQE. Sorry, the acronym. So now it deals with concept. C is for concept. T is for textual evidence. Q is for the question. Just check that. Sorry, Q is the quote and E is the effect. So concept. What idea or notion about human experiences is the question asking you to foreground? You must specifically address this in your answer rather than writing generally about the concept. So you always have to have that human experience at the back of your mind when you look at all these things. The textual evidence. You need textual evidence for everything. Carefully choose the textual evidence that will support your idea about the human experience referred to in the question. You may want to name the language or visual feature in the evidence, but we need to say how the technique works to support the meaning. So, concept, textual evidence, quote, and the effect. Quote, where possible, quote directly from the text to support the idea and the aspects of human experience you are discussing. So a big part of English is quotes. Have your quotes, because they'll always say, where did you get this idea from? Where did it come from? It has to come from somewhere. You have to put your finger on it. Now, the examiner knows that it's there, but you have to prove that you know that it's there. Effect. What meaning is made by the composer's choice of the language visual feature? What might it affect in the eyes of the responder? How does it communicate your ideas? Make sure your explanation of the textual evidence links directly to the notion of human experience referred to in the question. Do not necessarily have this in the exact order, CTQE, so long as it's there somewhere embedded in your answer. So let's look at some sample questions and answers. So a sample question could be, how does the poet capture the human experience of learning about the world around you? So let's look at how this person answers that. In this poem, Atwood expresses the importance of learning about the world, which she imparts in the tender tone apparent to a child. Atwood uses second person in, you begin this way, this is your hand, this is your eye, this is your mouth, to convey the importance of knowing about yourself before you move into the world. The importance of individuals understanding the reality of conflict, hardship, and destruction in the wider world are conveyed through vivid colour imagery in, you are right to smudge it that way with red and then the orange, the world burns. Atwood ends the poem with tender tactile imagery, suggesting that it is important for individuals to be gently guided to appreciate the beauty and complexity of the world. This is your hands. These are my hands. This is the world. So you can see that answer, how it has the concept. It has a quote. It has the effect. And it has the evidence. We need all those things. It's a very thorough response. And it's a response that you can do if you start practicing writing this way by looking at past exam papers. Another way we should look at is good sentences, because we saw in the rubric that third section is how do we organise our writing? So let's look at some examples of good sentences. Sometimes we're just so used to writing in such a way, and no one's ever pulled us up about our writing style. But sentences are really the building blocks of writing. So let's have a look of our sentences and what makes a good sentence. I'll give you a few minutes just to have a look at that. So someone's come up with this idea of dias, because we have to start looking at how do we write our sentences? Are we operating from the most basic level, or are we going to the highest level? So they are description, interpretation, analysis, and synthesis. That's where we get the word dias from. Description is simply telling the reader what the text is about. It is a recount, full of a plot summary or just describing a section closely. Interpretation means that you explain words and ideas. You apply some skills from your understanding. Analysis means that you go outside the text and search for ideas and meanings that link different parts of the text with values and beliefs in society. You are trying to work out the reasons for the composer's choices of language. The why has he chosen or she chosen this particular way of communicating to express the ideas in the text. Synthesis is the most difficult level of thinking, as it requires you to start linking ideas from different parts of the text. Go outside the text to find connections. Synthesis builds on analysis, making links between different texts or linking ideas within a text. So there's some examples there of dias and how it works. So just have a look at those, then I'll read through them. Gower's play Away begins and ends with scenes from 2 Shakespearean plays, 1 comedy and 1 tragedy. So it's just basically telling us what it is. It's just a recount. Interpretation, through including both comic and tragic scenes from Shakespearean plays, Gower creates a sense of atmosphere and alludes to the simultaneously humorous and sobering nature of the characters' lives. We're going to more interpretation and explanation. Analysis. The composer's choice of a scene from King Lear simultaneously foreshadows Tom's tragic demise and reminds the audience of the potential for healing through acceptance. Synthesis. The intertextual references in a way create a pastiche of allusions which allow Gal to subtly explore the character's quest in a changing and divisive society. Try to develop your writing into analysis and synthesis wherever possible. Sometimes you can't do that, but that's what you need to be striving for. It's a different gear when you're driving a car, and some of you have got your license. If you drive a manual car, you'll realize it's a different gear will allow you to do different things. So synthesis is the top gear. And if you can get into that gear, that's where you should be aiming for in your exam. So they've got a midsection in this exam where you've got extended short answer questions. So really, this is when you have to compare two or more texts together. And this has been around for quite a while in the English short answers section. So it's not an uncommon thing. So what you're really doing is you're not writing a paragraph, you're writing like a mini essay. I would say you should be writing in the vicinity of 1 to 2 pages, maybe a little bit more. And often it's a 6 or 7 mark question. So it requires you to think a lot more and to plan a lot more. So be aware of this type of question. So you have to look at it like a mini essay. And I will be talking about essay writing later for the last part of this talk. And I think the biggest danger in these exams is people just fall into recount, whether they're writing short answer responses or whether they're writing the extended response. And that's a band 1, band 2 mark. You need to go into more detail. You need to give us more evidence. You need to give us the features. You need to have these features and you need to know these techniques at your fingertips to do well on this exam. So let's look at the extended response section, which is section 2. I want you to think about how you put together your extended responses before I start this topic. Now, the extended response is important because really paper 1 has an essay in section 2. Paper 2 is made up really of 2, possibly 3 essays. So we're writing potentially 4 essays in the English exam. So we need to know how to write extended responses. Now, there are different formats for this question, and it's often a generic question, and it won't refer to a prescribed text as such, but it will ask you to use your prescribed text. So the question may be about this specific text, about the form, or arising from a statement. Now, let me clarify. A specific text could be or would be there for paper 2, modules A and B, where they will refer to a specific text. But for section 2, it'll be more a general question that is asked. So in this section, I will cover aspects to do also with paper 2 to help you with the writing of essays. Now, there are different question formats, so let's look at them and we'll look at some examples of some questions so we're familiar with these formats. There is discussion of a general statement. All right. Now, this question may start with a general statement or quotation, which relates to texts and human experiences, and a second statement directing you to what is needed to be answered. It could be thematic in nature or ask you to examine an aspect in the module description. For example, texts reflect the lived experiences of diverse and vibrant individuals. Discuss this statement in relation to your prescribed text. So it's fairly general, as you can see. It's really saying, tell us what you do know about this topic. It's not there to trap you as such. It's an open-ended question, and it's asking you to write down as many things as you can. Give you some more discussion examples. Stories help us to understand different societies and ideas. In doing so, they encourage us to challenge and reflect on our own beliefs and values. Explore this statement with reference to your prescribed text. Human behaviour is often paradoxical. Once again, these words are emerging, and inconsistent, because every individual has complex motivations. Examine this statement with close reference to your prescribed text. So you can see this idea of human experiences, human behaviour, the paradoxes, the challenge, all these things in the theme are coming out in these questions. So you need to be familiar with them. Or it could be a to what extent type question. What extent is this true? A to what extent question may be triggered by a quotation or a statement and may require you to include a qualifying word. Now, the words you would use would be greatly or significantly or to some degree. They're asking you to what extent. You may think of an alternative position, but dismissing the position offered in an examination question and supporting a very different position is not wise. Usually taking an alternative position requires a lot of risk, and I wouldn't advise you doing that. So here's an example. Through exploring human experiences, stories encourage us to develop insights about the behaviour and motivation of others. To what extent has your prescribed text presented you with new and challenging insights? Now that gets us back to that activity question, which we said, what do you hold about human experiences that no one else does? So they're really strong statements that you can make in this question. To what extent has your prescribed text encouraged you to reflect on how individuals change and develop due to their experiences? So we'll just pause there and then we'll go through the other questions. So